Hello, this video comes to us from Soph Florence. She's doing the Welsh board. She's looking at Of Mice and Men. And the question is, how is Lennie presented in Of Mice and Men? Throughout the novella of Mice and Men, Lennie is portrayed in several ways, but predominantly, in my eyes, as childlike, an outsider and a symbol of fate. So this is pretty sophisticated because you're introducing three different ways of looking at the character, and hopefully your essay will deal with all three of those ways. Steinbeck has cleverly crafted this character in a way that allows readers to emotionally connect with Lennie. So that's a fourth way that you're going to talk about, this emotional connection. As a consequence, this builds a very vivid image of Steinbeck's views and how exactly this can relate to the years of the Great Depression in America. So that's his purpose. So you've said 5 things in your introduction, which is really a brilliant kind of an essay plan, telling the examiner and yourself in the exam that there are 5 things you're going to write about. Well, I'm really interested to see if your essay does what it says on the tin. Firstly, Lennie is seen to be childlike. It's evident from the very beginning that he's going to have to be continually reminded of the most basic information. When George tells Lennie to remember not to say anything to the boss, Lennie droned to himself softly. The verb droned reflects in having to repeat the information he's just been given and is almost quite similar to a child having to use their fingers to count. You don't have to put so much justification. We can accept it as childlike. The fact that he's done this softly furthers his childish persona. So now this is becoming a really sophisticated point. And maybe implies that he doesn't want to make it obvious that he's desperately trying to drill what George has just told him into his head. That's another really sophisticated point, which you're going to expand on. Maybe he fears that George would be angered by him having to drone to himself, and he doesn't want to displease him. This builds sympathy for Lennie, as it's clear just how careful he has to be, or else he could wreck his and George's dream. Perhaps, I should have highlighted that in yellow really, perhaps Steinbeck is implying through this idea how especially complex life was for men with disabilities in 1930s America and how easy it was for them to get into trouble. That's possibly true actually. It feels like a bit of a reach, but you're getting there. Some people ask me, how do I write a lot about a little? This is a really good example of how you can get lots of interpretations out of small quotations, and you're getting credit for this as well because you're always linking it to Steinbeck's purpose. And I'm going to keep highlighting in yellow, as you'll see, where you deal with Steinbeck's purpose, which is one of the major strengths of this essay. Okay, another quote showing Lennie's childishness is just before he's about to be fought by Curly. When Curly enters the bunkhouse after Lennie and George having discussed their dream of living off the fat of the land, he is still smiling with delight. The fact that he was smiling in spite of Curly's arrival implies that he, like a child, finds it hard to control himself in certain social situations. Naturally, this gets him into trouble, thus potentially foreshadowing the further problems that will arise further in the novella. He will ultimately crush his and George's dream. Alternatively, it's possible that Steinbeck is using Lennie to symbolize Herbert Hoover, the do-nothing president of 1920s America. Smillet posters, or Smilette posters, I haven't heard of these before, I'm going to look them up, were made with Hoover saying, "Smile away the Great Depression." Therefore, maybe Steinbeck's message is that action needs to be taken and that people can't simply smile all the problems away. Now, what's important is that I'm not convinced by this at all, but that doesn't make any difference. It's a really great link that you've made here between the Herbert Hoover posters and this description of George, of Lennie, and the examiner's going to give you full credit for it. You've made historical knowledge really relevant to the description. This is exactly how to use it. And the examiner doesn't have to agree with you, they just have to admire your argument and your reasoning. So well done for this. This is a really cool way to introduce some contextual knowledge that I didn't actually have. Lennie is also shown as being an outsider. Whoops, let's go back to your introduction, which you remember I said worked like a plan. So we've done childlike, now we're going to outsider. So this essay is doing what it said on the tin. This is particularly expressed through the quote, "I never seen such a strong guy." The fact that he's never seen a man so strong suggests that Lennie is very different from the typical ranch hands. Whilst Curly is a willing fighter, Slim has practically suggested that Lennie is much stronger. Thus, this suggests that whilst he's strong, this is not necessarily a good thing and simply makes him excluded from the group. Well, this is not a well-made point here in that yes, he is excluded, but he isn't excluded because of his strength. He's excluded because of his mental disability, isn't he? Because of his childlike nature. Maybe Steinbeck is implying is what you mean there, that physical traits were not the be-all and end-all, and that this did not necessarily determine one's social standing. Yes, that's a valid point, although I'm not sure it's a point that the novel is making. You need a little more work. Let's see how you do. Alternatively, perhaps Steinbeck is fictionally giving the disadvantaged men some form of hope. Physical strength was evidently an important feature for the strenuous work. Now, we can see that that's absolutely true in the novel, and you pulled this paragraph around. That had to be carried out, and so by fictionally giving an excluded man this highly looked upon skill, this is Steinbeck's way of providing readers with hope for America's future. So this is a much more sophisticated idea where you see his strength as symbolic of America's strength. When Lennie unusually enters Crook's room, he says, "I seen your light." From this it's quite clear that he's different to the other men who avoid crooks. Excellent, and that links perfectly with the difference that you were talking about there. But again, that's not a difference connected to his strength. It's his childlike innocence. In my opinion, light is metaphoric of Crook's inner goodness, which Lennie, unlike the other ranch hands, is able to identify. As a consequence, this shows Lennie and Crooks as being equal in terms of social standing. Both of them are excluded from society. However, this could also be portrayed as a result of being different from the other men on the ranch, this makes Lennie kinder, as he can see the positive side to Crooks. Maybe Steinbeck is suggesting that those who were excluded from society were in fact the good ones who actually had a heart, thus implying that many Americans had been brainwashed. So up until there, this is a perfect way to get to alternative interpretations and to write about Steinbeck's purpose. This idea here, you haven't really backed up. How are Americans brainwashed? Presumably you mean in their prejudice against others who are different, but this is slightly clumsy. Finally, Lennie could also be interpreted as a symbol of fate. At the end, he envisages a gigantic rabbit calling him, as George would, a crazy bastard. By having two of his most favourite things telling him off, this could suggest that Lennie deserves his fate, death, because of the bad things that he's done. Perhaps if it was another nastier character telling him this, readers would not be as convinced that Lennie deserves his fate. This is a very sophisticated idea. So you as a reader are kind of putting yourself in the place of God, saying, yes, Lennie deserves to be punished, because even though he didn't mean to commit murder, nevertheless it's murder. Quite an interesting idea. Will you show that Steinbeck agrees with this? Let's find out. However, by the two most loyal things in his life expressing this, it's more believable. And here's your link to Steinbeck. Steinbeck is clearly implying here that ultimately dreams simply would not come true in 1930s America. By using Lennie's version of his dream for rabbits, this puts across this message in a perhaps kinder approach which readers can connect with more successfully. You've not really proven that here. It's tagged onto this paragraph where you were arguing something different about Lennie deserving his fate. So this is a weakness. However, this one's in yellow, so it must be pretty good. As a couple of nights ago, I think I did this. Let's find out. This idea is further accentuated where Lennie says, "I've done another bad thing." Perhaps Lennie has finally come to terms with what's good and what is really bad. This is religiously inferred as the Christian idea that life is a lesson, which we know Lennie has had to learn multiple times with smaller animals. Unfortunately, he did not learn this lesson and in turn got Curly's wife killed. This therefore could imply that Lennie deserves his fate of death. So you're pulling this out of the bag now, linking back to that idea that was up here. Because he's failed to learn his lesson earlier. Steinbeck might be relating this with America. Again, this idea of seeing Lennie as a symbol of America rather than as a symbol of manhood is a very interesting one, which I haven't come across before, and I'm really impressed with it because you make a good case. Confidence levels were massive in the 1920s and all seemed well, but as a result, as shown through Lennie's death, they had to endure a depression. Yeah, I like the way you've done that. So you're making a parallel. Lennie's death is symbolic of the Great Depression. So the death of the American dream that way is quite well handled. Well done. Overall, Steinbeck has created a particularly ambiguous character, presented in my eyes as childish, an outsider and a symbol of fate. Whilst Lennie could be seen as a dream crusher, he could further be interpreted as the breath of fresh air that America needed in society. Well, you would have to link that to his lack of prejudice and his acceptance of crooks, which you haven't fledged out in this conclusion. In my view, though, he's mainly seen as someone who brought the prosperity of America to a halt. That's clumsily phrased. It sounds like Lennie is responsible for the Great Depression, which of course he isn't. He instead represents how that society was brought to a halt. You need to say why Lennie represents that. So acting without thought, and his thoughtlessness is equivalent to the thoughtlessness of the American people before the Great Depression. Right, let's have a go at marking it. You can see from the bits in yellow that you're continually writing about Steinbeck's purpose. You've quoted skillfully in each paragraph. You've written a lot about a little when you need to. You've introduced the context in an original way and only to back up the ideas you've got. The weaknesses that I've pointed out do stop me putting it in the very top band, possibly. And so my gut instinct as I'm reading it is, am I going to give this candidate an A or an A star? There are too many inaccuracies where you don't follow through little points properly for the A star, but I'm very happy to give it an A. You've also written 1,000 odd words, which I'm not sure you'd be able to do in the exam. So you might sneak into the A star because you've written so much, and in an exam that will impress an examiner. So I'm going to go with A star minus then. But remember, my opinion is just that, a gut reaction. Other examiners might have a different gut reaction, but you'll certainly not drop below an A grade. And well done, thank you for sharing it with us. I hope my viewers will steal some ideas from you, and I'm going to steal what you taught me about Herbert Hoover. That wasn't an aspect of context that I knew. Anyway, good luck in your revision. If you'd like more videos, you know what to do, just subscribe.